In 1917, the area of Flanders to the east of Ypres was of great strategic importance. For the Allies, it was the gateway to breaking out of the stalemate in the north and retaking Belgium. For the Germans, on the high ground, it was a dagger at the Allies' throat. If the British could only break out of the Ypres salient and take it, they could turn north and drive the Germans from the Belgian coast and capture the ports of Ostend and Zeebrugge from the enemy. Also, the German position in Belgium would be outflanked, and their industrial heartland in the Ruhr would be under threat. In addition, U-boats were operating out of Zeebrugge with great success, and the Admiralty was increasingly gloomy about what would happen in the English Channel if the Belgian ports were not closed to the enemy. An attack in Flanders would also hold down the German reserves and relieve the pressure on the French, who needed time to recover from the bloody shambles of Verdun. Field Marshal Haig was under pressure to make an attack in Flanders no matter the cost. The plan that he came up with was to strike out of Ypres to the north and east and, in conjunction with a seaborne landing on the coast of Belgium at Niepoort, he would capture the high ground at Passchendaele, which was the key to the whole area. The Germans were well aware of the strategic importance of Flanders. That is why Ypres was the most heavily fortified part of their line.
The French and the English now have to kick the Germans out of the French and Belgian territory. That forces them to be on the defensive. If you've seen our site, you've noticed that a little bit more intricate on the German side. We're trying to recreate the Hindenburg line. So you can see the concrete bunkers and the structures. If you look on the Allied side, they're a little bit more cruder because the philosophy of the generals on the Allied side was cannot allow the men to get comfortable in their trenches because then they won't want to attack. So they didn't put the effort into it that the Germans did. And it turned out the Germans were absolute masters at devising defensive positions.
British security was very poor, and the Germans knew all about the forthcoming battle, and had therefore taken countermeasures well in advance. 4 days before the battle was due to begin, the Germans carried out a tactical retreat from their front line back to the more secure Passchendaele Ridge. This left a zone of marshland in the low-lying ground between their new front line and the British. This new position, the Hindenburg Line, was a defense 3 lines deep, the third being beyond the range of the British guns. Between these lines was barbed wire, scattered concrete pillboxes, and machine gun nests.
The Germans made heavy use of concrete. When they fell back to build the Hindenburg Line, they already knew that wooden timbers and dirt and sandbags was not enough because of the heavy caliber artillery they were using. So the Germans, because they had pulled back far enough, built and used concrete. This machine gun bunker is set here to guard this intersection.
The barbed wire funneled the attackers into killing zones, swept by machine guns, and carefully registered by the artillery, so that the attackers could be annihilated by a crippling concentration of shells.
There are 3 ways through here. If the troops in the front trench are pushed back, this is where they fall back to rally. And with the machine gun, that poses a problem for the Allies attacking. If they just come straight down the trench, they're all going to die. Now we're firing blanks, they're playing the game, but it's impossible to come down that trench. As the first 3 or 4 men go down, the next couple go down, eventually the men behind them can't climb over the bodies.
Another German advantage was artillery. The German guns were superior to those of the British. They had a longer range and were more accurate. And most important, the Germans had better shells that were more likely to explode. They also had a new secret weapon, mustard gas, delivered by shell fire. This was a liquid that caused blistering of the skin if touched, if the unfortunate soldier even walked through the zone of evaporation, and the effect on the eyes was disastrous. If inhaled, it could cause pulmonary edema. No antidote was to be found, and after its first use in a barrage on July 26th, 1 man in 6 of the Fifth Army became a casualty. Considered uncivilized prior to World War I, the development and use of poison gas was necessitated by the requirement of wartime armies to find new ways of overcoming the stalemate of unexpected trench warfare. Although it's popularly believed that the German army was the first to use gas, it was in fact initially deployed by the French. Nevertheless, the German army was the first to use it on a large scale. The debut of the first poison gas, however, in this instance chlorine, came on April 22, 1915, at the start of the Second Battle of Ypres. At this stage of the war, the famed Ypres salient, held by the British, Canadians, and French, ran for some 10 miles and bulged into German-occupied territory for 5 miles. A combination of French territorials and Algerian troops held the line to the left, with the British and Canadians tending the center and the line to their right. During the morning of April 22nd, the Germans poured a heavy bombardment around Ypres, but the line fell silent as the afternoon grew. Towards evening, at around 5 p.m., the bombardment began afresh, except that sentries posted among the French and Algerian troops noticed a curious yellow-green cloud drifting slowly towards their line. Puzzled but suspicious, the French suspected that the cloud masked an advance by German infantry and ordered their men to stand to, that is, to mount the trench fire step in readiness for probable attack. The effects of the chlorine gas were severe. Within seconds of inhaling its vapor, it destroyed the victim's respiratory organs, bringing on choking attacks. Panic-stricken, the French and Algerian troops fled in disorder, creating a 4-mile gap in the Allied line. The Germans next turned it on the British and Canadian divisions.
At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there was a very heavy bombardment started, and a little later on, we saw the effects of this. The first thing was hundreds of French troops running away. They were just like ants. They weren't sticking to roads or paths or anything else. They were all over the fields and breaking through hedges and everything. No arms, they'd all gone. And clutching their throats and saying, "Gas, gas."
Without protection from the toxic gas, like their allies, the United Kingdom troops, those who did not die, broke and ran.
We tried to rally them as they got level with us, and they wouldn't stay, and all we got from them was "Alley man, bum bum, my lad, my lad." And they kept going, and we got orders to turn around and shoot them, which we did, run away from us. And momentarily, we looked, and here we saw this green cloud coming along the ground.
Had the Germans been prepared for this eventuality, they could have potentially have effected a decisive breakthrough. However, the results of their experiment caused as much surprise to the German High Command as confusion among their opponents. German infantry did advance into the gap, but nervously and with hesitance, outflanking the Canadian and British troops to their right. The ensuing fighting was difficult. Although the Germans succeeded in seizing control of a significant portion of the salient, the Allies nevertheless managed to reform a continuous line, though in parts it remained dangerously weak. When a second gas attack came at Saint-Julien on April 24th, the Canadians, using towels, bandages, and handkerchiefs soaked in urine or water as improvised respirators, courageously prevented further erosion of the front.
One chap had his hand blown off, and his wrist was fumbling around, tearing at his throat.
The effect of this gas was to form a sort of foamy liquid in one's lungs, and more or less in time drown one, if you were unlucky. Because a lot of the men died pretty quickly. Others were soon down, dying. They were in fact drowning from this beastly foam coming up from their lungs.
And a course of treatment for those gassed was unknown.
From what I have read and have seen, there was like mustard patches that they would put on their eyes. A lot, from what I understand, wasn't, it was a trial and error what they this was something new. No one had ever encountered it.
There must have been 200 or 300 men, and they were wriggling and wreathing in all positions, tearing at their throats, their faces black. And an RAMC sergeant, he stood by there, and he looked, well, I've never seen a man look so despondent. He says, look at the poor bastards. He said, we can't do anything for them.
This was now a war of chemicals and engineering. The Germans' use of chlorine gas provoked immediate widespread condemnation and certainly damaged German relations with the neutral powers, including the U.S. The gas attacks were rapidly put to propaganda use by the British, although they planned to respond in kind on the battlefield. The attack had one clear benefit at home, however, for it brought to an end German hesitancy and internal disagreement over its use. The cat was out of the bag, and the use of poison gas continued to escalate for the remainder of the war.